All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Benjamin Day,
And I am Jillian Mason.
and this is Medicare for All, the podcast for everybody who needs healthcare, which is most people, it turns out. So
Everybody? Yeah.
we are, well, everyone, I want to, maybe a few people, I wouldn't mind kicking off the island, but um, this is, we're recording on Valentine's Day, going live on Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. And we're going to be showing some love for moms and other folks who have given birth on our Medicare for All podcast by talking about kind of one of these extremely important but not nearly discussed enough aspects of our healthcare system, which is maternal health care. Um, we're going to be sharing your stories about the good, the bad, and the ridiculously expensive. We emailed our list asking you all for your stories, and we're absolutely horrified by what you've gone through. I'm so sorry. We're going to be kind of celebrating everyone's resilience, getting fired up to kind of change the system of what it looks like to have a baby in this country. And before we go start down the road of this topic, I just want to throw in a little disclaimer here. We're calling this maternal health care because that's kind of the term the majority of our listeners will recognize. But we want to say right off the bat that obviously not everyone who has a uterus is a woman, and not everyone who gives birth is a mom. Trans men and non-binary folks have babies, and they can face even more challenging obstacles to accessing prenatal care and birthing care. Just because they're working with the extra layer of misunderstanding and discrimination. So we want to give a shout out to everyone who struggles with this healthcare system. And we're going to talk about our stories. So Jillian, do you want to introduce our guest?
Yes, I'm so excited. So, Ben doesn't have a uterus and I don't have children. So we had to bring in a mom spurt. So we have here our new friend Claire from Kansas City. Claire is a dietitian and she has 2 kids, and she is going to be weighing in from the mom's perspective on this. Yeah.
Thanks, Jillian. Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you for sure. So I kind of wanted to kick off this episode though by telling another story. We have our good friend Rebecca Wood, who's big single payer Medicare for All activist. She talks a lot about some of the issues that she had after her child was born, dealing with all sorts of horrors of the healthcare system. But I hadn't really heard this part of her story. And when we put out the call for stories to folks on our email list, asking people to write in, she wrote in this piece of her story that I thought was like, sort of just sums it all up, All right. So I'm going to read from Rebecca's story, and I'm quoting directly from her. So just the background that you need is just that she was having a difficult pregnancy, and eventually she had to go to the emergency room. All right. So I went to the emergency room. My blood pressure was 190 over 110. I was diagnosed with severe preeclampsia and hospitalized. I spent the next few days sitting in the dark because light made my brutal headache worse, while the daily blood work documented my slow deterioration. Meds were given. The perinatologist explained to me that we were defusing a bomb. We needed to keep me pregnant until the very last minute I could, to where it wouldn't harm me or the baby. I would be hospitalized until I had my baby, and it could be days, or hopefully it would be a month or so. After a few days on Wednesday, the OBGYN explained to me that I wasn't crashing fast enough for insurance to pay for me to be hospitalized, and that I would have to go home on Friday. Horrified, I asked the perinatologist about it. She said that she had done this dance with preeclampsia hundreds of times and that there was no way it was safe for me to be home. But my OBGYN insisted insurance said that I had to go home. Thursday night, my kidneys failed. It was clear now that I only had a matter of days until I delivered. I got to stay hospitalized. This is the part, by the way, that really
got to stay hospitalized. What a treat.
What Rebecca says is, I think about how lucky I was my kidneys failed when they did. Otherwise, I would have gone home for the weekend. By Monday, Charlie and I were both dying. because I developed HELLP syndrome over the weekend, HELLP. On Friday, my kidneys failed. When it was clear Charlie was coming in a matter of days, I got a NICU consult. And during the NICU consult, the neonatologist came in her room and gave her a piece of paper with her baby's survival odds, right? Based on gestational age and weight. And said, do you have any questions? And of course she didn't have questions because she was fucking overwhelmed. So that visit lasted 2 minutes and she was charged close to $400, which her insurance wouldn't pay for. Basically, Rebecca, this experience, as well as some of her other experiences with healthcare, this is like what, really shaped her into an activist. And she says, I think about how I was in the nation's capital, and this was considered good healthcare with good insurance, in quotes. And I'm furious. If this is what it's like for me, what chance do mothers with less privilege have? What do you think, guys? Great story. America, USA, #1.
Oh man, sometimes I really hate it here.
You never want to be told you're not crashing hard enough to be hospitalized, to be given the care that you need. That's just wild. I mean,
that's horrifying. So is the we're diffusing a bomb metaphor.
Yeah.
Like the guy needs to maybe work on his bedside manner a little bit. That's a little inflammatory for
we're diffusing a baby.
Yeah. A lot of women actually who wrote about the fact that they felt like their pregnancy was treated as a health problem. As opposed to.
That's what the medical system is designed for. We're not really, the healthcare system has not really ever been designed to deal with chronic disease or like things that just increase your risk slightly. It's acute illness machine, and we're really good at that.
Yeah.
Providers really good at that. If I get in a car accident, I want to go to the ER. Do not give me a tincture of herbs. But yeah,
absolutely.
How are your 2 young acute illnesses doing, Claire, these days?
One of them has an acute illness.
Oh no.
So fun. She woke up at 4:30 this morning and proceeded to have a tantrum for an hour and a half.
That's too early for that. For both of you.
Yeah. Happy Valentine. My husband looked at me and said, so should I schedule my vasectomy now?
And that's also
that is yes.
A recurring theme in the show.
Yeah, it was
persuade you.
Yeah, a very happy Valentine's Day moment. Like,
I'm glad you're still awake to be with us.
It's it's just, it is what it is.
That's what shit moms do,
Yeah, the only way out is through, and that's what I have told all of my friends when they get pregnant and they're scared of giving birth. Like it just kind of happens.
Okay, so yes, we obviously don't want to make women scared about giving birth, but that being said, here are some really scary statistics about giving birth. So basically, I think the story that we all know, right, is that like throughout the 20th century, maternal mortality rates have dropped rapidly, right? We got better living conditions. We got safer surgical procedures. We understand the body a lot more, right? So that's a beautiful story. Except in the US. So basically, actually, all over the world in the 90s, the maternal mortality ratio, which is like the number of maternal deaths per 100,000 births, right? It began to rise up again because of rising inequality. And in the US, we are particularly, we have to be particularly embarrassed because in the US, the richest country in the world, et cetera, #1, go USA. In 2018, the US maternal mortality ratio was actually 17.4 for 100,000 births, which is the highest in any comparable, quote unquote, developed country, for whatever the word developed is worth. And Canada was 8.6, the UK was 6.5, Norway, the Netherlands, New Zealand, they are all below 3. So countries that have single payer healthcare do tend to have better maternal mortality rates, but you know, it's just a huge problem here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that I think is really important to mention, though, is that Rebecca in her story, she says, like, if this was how bad it was for me, then like how bad is it for people with less privilege? And that's really important to remember too, because people who are already fucked in the United States get fucked more when it comes to maternal care. And specifically, it's about Black mothers, right? There's always been a disparity between maternal mortality rates between white mothers and Black mothers, and it's only gotten worse with time. So since the 70s, Black mothers have been like 3 to 4 times more likely to die than white mothers, which is shocking and terrifying.
Terrifying and awful. I don't know if shocking is the right word.
That's true. That's true. I retain my ability to be shocked by things, even though I intellectually know them. Like,
yeah, I admire that about you, Jillian.
Thank you. Thank
That's
you.
a nice trait.
I'm from New Jersey. I'm Italian. I get emotional,
Oh, okay.
So yeah. Basically, I mean, the reasons for this kind of crazy situation in the U.S. Are legion, right? But the the fact we have all these different kind of conditions in this country that sort of contribute to that, including the fact that we don't actually give people who've had babies paid leave after childbirth. We have a shortage of maternity care providers like midwives and OBGYNs here. And also we have less access to postpartum care. And it turns out that 52% of maternal deaths occur postpartum. So that's why it's particularly significant. And we're going to revisit that later on in the show. Anyway, that's me rattling off statistics. But it's fucked.
Yeah, and I think to put a little bit of context on this, I mean, although we were talking about maternal mortality there too, I know infant mortality is also extraordinarily high in the United States and has the same massive racial inequities, and we are far, far worse than most other countries. In fact, I think a lot of the maternal mortality, infant mortality, explains our most of our low average lifespan in general. Is when babies are dying in infancy, obviously it's a very short lifespan. But it's hard to tell exactly how much of this is due to the healthcare system and how much could be fixed, for example, with the Medicare for All system. I know that Black mothers who are high income and high education still have much higher rates of infant mortality and maternal mortality than even more so than poor low income white moms. So the thinking is that there's probably a lot of layers of inequities going on here. Higher stress levels from dealing with microaggressions all day, every day, and systemic injustices. And then there's biases that go on just in the delivery system. Even if you have coverage, you may be treated differently by providers. We know you get treated differently by providers, even if they're the best intentioned providers. So not all 100% of this can be necessarily fixed by having a universal healthcare system, but there's no question that that's got to be kind of a piece of it, right? But I did want to shout out here that it's one of these areas where it's a health injustice, but not just a healthcare injustice. It's like a bunch of intersectional things probably compounding to end up to these really horrifying and one might say shocking statistics you just rattled off. So
that's a really good point, Ben. All right. So these are numbers, though. Let's hear from an actual person. Mom Spurt, Claire.
That's such a fun title.
You can put it on your CV if you want. We'll be your reference.
Will do.
Yeah.
Will do.
That's awesome. So yeah, I mean, we asked you to come be on the show because you actually had written in your story, and it was, pretty fucking shitty. So
I mean, I will say, like, gravity. I had none of the problems that the story you were just telling earlier. I mean, context totally different. but I
Mhm.
have kind of a different lens on this. I have, as we've mentioned, I have 2 kids, a 5-year-old and 2-year-old. The 5-year-old was born when I lived just outside of San Francisco. I worked for a university. I had California state insurance, and I paid no premiums
Okay.
and $30 for the entirety of my prenatal and birth.
Shut up. Are you serious?
It was amazing.
Mhm.
Oh my
Whatever I
God.
needed, I just called up Kaiser, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we have that. Here you go. Make an appointment here." It was a little more um, complicated's the wrong word, but like you could tell that there was pressure on the system because they had really stretched out the prenatal appointments a lot,
Mhm.
and that was
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
nerve
Yeah.
wracking. I was
Mhm.
young and didn't like lived really far away from my family and
Mhm.
nervous and hadn't really planned on being pregnant. So that was a surprise. And
That's a lot. Yeah.
it was we're navigating a lot of things. But the healthcare piece of it was really wonderful. And
Right.
then my daughter was born a month early, so we did stay in the hospital a little bit longer than usual. She had lots of follow-up care. Oh my God, we tracked her back to that hospital once or twice a day for like 3 weeks for
Damn.
something. I don't know. So
Right.
much spent so much time at Kaiser Walnut Creek. I never want to look at that place ever again. Um,
No kid should have that many doctor's appointments before their first birthday.
well, and the frustrating piece of it is it was usually just like to get a weight check. She was a preemie, so she was growing slowly. So
Right. Right.
me and all of
Mm.
my postpartum glory were like packing up the house,
Mhm.
walking a mile to the hospital, lugging the car seat up and down the step. It was hard,
Yeah.
physically, like just really physically challenging at that stage. And like you'd weigh her, and they'd say, "Okay, she's doing a little better. Maybe supplement with some more formula,"
Mhm.
and then we'd leave, and that was it.
And
Okay.
that was it.
This is like the best of circumstances. Was still obviously, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but at least we weren't getting a lot of bills, and I wasn't worried about having to pay
Right.
for all of
Yeah.
this. That
Yeah.
was, like, the silver lining. When
Because that's one of the things, right? Is that the process of being pregnant and giving birth is so physically demanding on women, emotionally demanding. There's
Right,
hormones, there's all sorts of stuff going on, right? And then you're just exhausted afterwards, right? Like dealing with
right.
healthcare is probably the last thing you need to deal with.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, exactly. It's like, I need to take things off of my plate right now. I can't you can charge me a bunch of money for something that I didn't realize wasn't gonna be covered and that I had
Mm.
maybe the option to say no to. Like, that's just another thing. So,
Mhm.
when I was pregnant with my second child, we had moved back to the Kansas City area where we're both from, and I had started a new job. I had really good private insurance, and spent a lot of time. I think I spent 3 or 4 hours one day calling around to all of the hospitals in the area, asking them how much it would cost to give birth there.
Oh my God.
Because I knew with
Let's shop around.
I was trying to shop around, and the answer was somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000. And, your insurance may pay for all or some or none of that, and that's
That's
something that
the
you work
worst
out with
neighborhood
them.
ever. The $10,000 neighborhood.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I mean, who
And
on what income can afford a
I don't know.
$10,000 childbirth? I mean, children
That's
are expensive too,
children are
even when they're totally healthy. And
yes.
I don't have kids, and I'm not preparing to send them to college, and I don't have $500 in my savings account, let alone
No.
10,000.
Yeah, it was it was nuts. But I was trying to, like, figure out if one of the hospitals was cheaper, and then could I find an OB that I like that would deliver at that hospital, and would that be cheaper? And eventually it
You're
was
looking
like
for the Walmart of hospitals.
I was attempting to do that, but it
Mhm.
was crazy making and it wasn't working. So I
Right.
just, like,
Yeah,
had
yeah,
to pick
yeah.
one, and
Mhm.
I ended up, like, it was not a bad experience. My OB was very good. I needed a little bit of extra care because of my premature birth history that no one could ever tell me why that happened. I'm going to go with probably stress, but it's another thing.
It's a good guess.
Yeah. And we're able to keep the second one cooking longer, which was really great. Also uncomfortable, but ultimately a really good thing. And we took her to the hospital, finally got to the hospital. It was like waiting for my labor. I was pretty prepared to go into labor like 6 weeks early. This is
Right.
my
Second time around.
history.
Right.
Not your first rodeo.
It's not my first rodeo. Like I'm gonna be early. And I was not. And that was super frustrating. Like, where is this damn baby? I've been waiting for this baby. I expected this baby to come out a long time ago. But with my private insurance and not having that state insurance, I was getting billed for all sorts of things. I got billed for I think it was like labeled preventive or like standard prenatal panel for labs that they do on every pregnant woman to make sure there's not something horrifyingly wrong like your first visit. I got billed like $50 for that. And I thought, well, that can't be right.
Blood work.
Because it's just basic blood work, first of all. And second of all, if it's a standard lab panel, then it's a preventative.
Yeah.
Right. It shouldn't be billable, right?
It shouldn't be billable. It should be covered.
And we should say that in your work life, you actually deal with some of this stuff, right? So you probably know more than the average person.
Maybe. I attempt to know more than the average person. I'm not always successful because there's a lot to know. It's very confusing and it changes all the time. So I called the doctor and made sure that they code it right. And then I called the lab and I was like, this should be covered. And they're like, well, I don't know. Your insurance company says it's not. So I called the insurance company. I spent, I don't know, like 45 minutes between holds and being transferred person to person. Like, why am I being charged for this? This is preventive standard of care. It should not be charged. It should be covered. And he said, the very patient, nice man on the phone, told me that it used to be covered, and the administration changed what was defined as preventative, and now that preventative lab, like that standard lab panel, wasn't covered anymore. And I was like,
how can you change what's preventative? Isn't that an objective reality or not?
Donald Trump fucked me on this.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
Which there's lots of people who could say that, but
that's wild. So the Trump administration actually changed the standard for what was covered.
I don't really understand the mechanics behind it, but my basic understanding was that they kind of altered the definition of what was considered preventative care. Like when you do rules and regulations, whomever they had in charge of that, I don't even know where that lives in the government, decided that was not something that they were interested in classifying as preventive care any longer. Cool. So I was like,
so that was the $50 tip of the $10,000 iceberg.
Yes, basically. And I had to go get shots every week which was a separate, like totally a different thing to help prolong the pregnancy. That was $25 for each, to pay the nurse to administer the shot. And then I want to say the medicine, well, the name brand medicine would have been like $800 a month. And then the generic brand that they determined was better covered was $300 a month. So
that's still a lot.
It felt like a big win, honestly, but yes, it's a lot.
A lot of this kind of feels like a Disney vacation. You know how they get you in the park and then they can pretty much charge you for anything. You know what I mean? So bit. They get you in there and they're like, oh, you want hand sanitizer? Take our hand sanitizer. It has a Mickey on it and it costs $20.
Yeah. Like at the airport, you're thirsty? A bottle of water? Okay, I'll take $11. Like 4 ounces of water. Thank you. I don't have a choice.
I feel
Exactly.
like the part of your story that illustrates that most of all is definitely what happened after the baby was born, with the room and board charges.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to
So
learn more, hear more about this.
that was a fun surprise.
Hmm.
So I expected that I would get a bill, an unpleasant bill. My daughter was born in February. And so that was unfortunate timing because you meet your deductible for the prenatal care
Oh,
the
right.
year before,
And it
and then
resets.
it resets.
Hmm.
Mm,
And then so we got the bill for me, paid it, knew this was coming. We're able to put some money aside in the HSA account. And then we got a separate bill for room and board for my daughter. It's like, why? You get to charge to room and board an infant who like slept in my bed and had breast milk? What room and board is
It must have been the continental breakfast she was,
yeah,
consuming every morning.
really
Is really
was
the.
sneaking off to,
Uh-huh.
order some stuff from the cafeteria.
Getting into the mini bar, you know?
Yeah, it made no sense. But there again, I called the insurance company and I was like, what is this? Room and board for my infant. We shared a room.
I provided the food.
Yeah.
Even
Are you
hotels don't do this. Why
No,
are
they
hospital?
don't. They don't do this. Because it's just nickel and diming for the
Yeah.
sake of nickel and diming. Because
Mhm.
they can bill it, so they will.
That's wild. And so you questioned some of this stuff. Did you ever like actually have any victories with the insurance company?
Not so much with the insurance company, but I did have
Mm.
one victory where I determined that something was coded wrong. And it really should have been preventive
God,
care.
that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. It was probably not worth it. But
Yeah.
the principle of it just felt
Wow.
really important to me to argue with them
Hmm.
about it.
Well, I mean, we got to celebrate the small wins. I think that's true.
Yeah.
I actually, as I was looking for stories just around healthcare costs around childbirth, I found someone else who posted their story very similar to yours online, got charged twice for a room and board for
Hmm.
her and her baby. And again, tried to fight the hospital on this. And this was Intermountain Healthcare in Utah. And
Hmm.
the hospital rep said, well, where else was your baby going to sleep? And this person was just so outraged they refused to pay for it. And it hit their credit rating. And every time the collectors, they got sent to collections. And this person says, when the collectors call, I tell them that the only settlement I'm willing to consider is they go fuck themselves. Um, they were just so upset.
That'd be fun to say.
Yeah. But the
Yeah.
credit rating part is not so. You really have to be willing to die on that hill for this.
You really do, yeah. I mean, there's
Mm.
lots of very real life consequences to that.
Yeah.
Especially when you got kids, right? Like I can tag
Yeah.
my credit rating. It's fine. It's just me, right? You tag your credit rating, your kids aren't going to go to college.
Yeah.
I
That
mean,
could be
sorry,
a
I didn't mean to threaten you with that.
No, you're not wrong, I guess. I
Um,
mean, I don't know.
I do know from my own experience trying to fight with a health insurance company when I was just getting out of a hospital, it's kind of the moment in your life when you are least able really to fight for things.
Mhm.
It's just so overwhelming. It's like the last thing you want to be focusing on is your bills or your financial future, or you
Right.
should be focusing on your new child and recovering yourself. And
Yeah.
it's just criminal. So
Yeah, and that's I think I did call them and they were like, "Yeah, this is billable. You can't do anything about that." I was like, "That's really
God.
shitty." But I'm very tired and not really interested in
Right.
arguing with
Yeah.
you about this.
But please have it noted on my account. This is really shitty.
Right.
Yes. I'd like it to be on the record that this is bullshit.
Mhm. There's
Ben,
one
did
other
you find
person.
any other good stories? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say there was one other person who posted a story similar to this. They said, I asked for an itemized bill after my son was born. They immediately offered to reduce the price by 40%. And she says, the proudest moment of my life was the birth of my son. The second was when I countered at 60% and she accepted.
I'm so amazed that that worked.
Yeah, I can't imagine either. I mean,
I
it must have
mean,
been a really big bill, or they were certain they were not going to collect.
I believe this woman was a killer negotiator. I think she
Yeah,
was in, you
Yeah,
know.
she was just she was really kick-ass.
yeah,
That's awesome.
That's never worked for me, but I will keep
yeah.
trying it, knowing that it has worked.
Yeah, I went down this rabbit hole of these online stories, and I actually remember when this was a big news item. You guys might remember this from about 5 years back. There was this viral Reddit post in 2016 that kind of made the rounds in all the news stories about the mother who was charged $40 for skin-to-skin contact with her child after getting a C-section. It showed up as a separate itemized bill. And there was obviously a lot of outrage about being charged to like hold your baby after they've been born.
Yeah.
But much less discussed, at the bottom of the bill, it lists that the total bill for the childbirth was $13,000. Insurance paid $6,000 of that, and then another $5,500 was taken off for contractual allowance adjustment. Now, if you've never had the joys of learning how health insurance and hospital billing works, hospitals intentionally set outrageously high prices, way, way, way higher than it ever cost them to actually provide the services to you. On the off chance that they're going to get some wealthy uninsured people, maybe a visitor from another country who has money, who will be able to pay that whole bill. Most people cannot possibly, if they're uninsured, pay the whole price. So when they say that $5,500 contractual allowance adjustment, they're saying that's what we negotiated the price with the insurance company. It's actually going to be half of what we claim we're charging for it. But if you didn't have insurance, you would be charged that whole amount, that $5,500 on top of the $6,000 that the insurance company paid. And then this mom was still left with $1.6 thousand for the delivery, which is still an insane amount. It's not $10,000 like your story, but it's crazy. And this became such a big news story that there are over 12,000 comments on this Reddit post, and they're just like an endless list of people's similar stories of going through this same experience, but also in other, not just childbirth, but dental care and other forms of healthcare. One person said, "I'm staring at the $1,600. This should be shown to teenagers as a method of birth control."
Yeah.
It might work.
I mean, they don't talk about that in healthcare.
Yeah. Oh my
I
God.
was saying to Ben before we started recording, I was like, this is going to be our prophylactic episode. People are going to listen to this on Valentine's Day, and they're going to think twice before they have a V-Day snuggle.
Don't celebrate too much tonight, ladies and gentlemen.
Like, go in with an open, like, eyes all the way open. Like, what's the full story here? Kids are lovely and cuddly, but also
one joke. One brilliant commenter said, "Congratulations, you've given birth to a beautiful baby medical debt."
yeah, that's a good one.
And then the thing that annoyed me the most, but was the most relevant to a Medicare for All podcast like ours, was all of the Europeans and Canadians who started replying to this thread with their stories of childbirth. Which is literally how it should be, but is so frustrating if you were stuck with our healthcare system. There was the Canadian who said, "My husband and I were upset at the outrageous parking fees at the hospital after we had our babe. $47. We were only there for one night. That was our only medical expense to having a baby."
That is a lot for parking. But
yeah, really.
I'll trade.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bills that can end up on your lap when you're in a captive audience situation.
Right.
$10,000 medical expense, $47 parking. Then there was someone from the UK, a mom who said, a husband who said, "When my wife gave birth, we asked for a private room." This is a postnatal private room. This is the luxury suite. And we were supposed to pay £200. So that's probably, I don't know, $250, $300. But the midwife forgot to bill us. We found out later that the midwife always forgets on principle. So there's your concierge service.
I'd like to give her a hug.
I
That's really
know,
great.
this
Right.
midwife.
Yeah, yeah. Also, did you have a private room when you gave birth there?
I did have a private room when I gave
Oh,
birth,
It's
and
postnatal, yeah.
a postnatal room
Good,
that
good.
was private. Both times. The first time it was quite small and a little dingy, but you know,
It feels like this whole process should be private if you want.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
call me
That's a really
crazy.
good
Right.
option, you know?
Have you seen the episode of The Office where Pam and Jim have their baby and the baby, like, they're not in a private room, they're in a shared room with another
Yes,
couple, and
yes,
they
yes.
got the wrong baby, and she nurses the wrong baby back to sleep.
Awkward.
That's right, that's great, and her baby isn't latching, so she's, like, so proud
Yes.
of herself, she's like,
She's
"I
like,
got
"I did it!"
the baby."
Which is really a true accomplishment. That is really hard, but, yeah, that was
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Jillian, there's one more fucked up part of U.S. based healthcare system I wanted to highlight with a story.
Please
There's
do.
actually I found a lot of stories along these lines, but I'll just take the one here, which is not only what hospitals and insurance companies can do to the process and leaving you with bills, but what your employers can do. Because as you know, most
Great.
people have health insurance through their employer. So I'm going to tell you the story of Lauren Bard. This was published a couple years ago, but I actually found a bunch of news stories almost identical to this one or very similar. Now, Lauren's daughter was born 3 months prematurely, very, very, very premature. And she ended up getting a bill that said at the bottom, amount due $898,984.57. And she
Holy
had insurance. She had health insurance through her workplace. So how did this happen? So Lauren's employer, and I did not know this. I'm really glad I know about this now. Like most employers, requires you to enroll your newborn in your insurance plan
Yeah.
within 31 days of their being born.
Mhm.
And there's all sorts of other weird stories. Like if you have two parents who have different insurance plans, you have to notify both of them. And one will be the primary, one will be the secondary, and you can't always choose. Like it might be the one with the massive deductible that becomes your primary, even if the other one has no deductible. So all sorts of messed up stuff. So Lauren did not know about this 31-day provision. I think a lot of people don't. She had already talked to her insurance company and had been kind of led to believe that she was fine and it was covered. She didn't know she had to separately contact her employer.
Mhm.
So, and because her pregnancy was so complicated, a lot of these 31 days, she was in the hospital herself with her own health complications. Her daughter ended up being in the NICU. We've said NICU a few times now. This is the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. This is if there's complicated pregnancy, it's kind of the intensive care for babies. With her daughter was in the NICU for 100 days. So she was obviously spending a lot of time in the hospital with her daughter. And she's expected to do, the paperwork here.
Mhm.
And she was only notified by the hospital after this 31-day window had passed that she had missed the window and her insurance company wasn't going to cover any of her $1 million in childbirth expenses and obviously postnatal care. So, and she did everything. She went through an appeals process internally. The appeals were all rejected. She appealed to the morality of her employer. Her employer said, "We don't give a shit about you." And here's the most ironic thing. They didn't actually say that, but I think that's between
The
the lines,
outcome
right?
really,
Paraphrase.
Right.
actions speak louder than words, guys.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Her employer, Lauren, is an emergency room nurse. And her employer was Dignity Health, which is the 5th largest healthcare system in the country. And so
Dignity, health, dignity.
right. And they claimed they couldn't cover it even if they wanted to, just because of rules and regulations. But it turns out that's all bullshit, because as soon as ProPublica started writing the story on Lauren, and reporters started calling them, asking questions, lo and behold, they discovered they could just choose to cover her and accept her late enrollment or whatever. But yeah, I found a ton of stories like this where employers, especially, this is another arcane part of the health insurance system. About half of employers are what's called self-insured, which means that technically the employer is the insurance company. Almost all big businesses are self-insured, like Walmart, Target, these sorts of any large employer. A lot of cities and towns are self-insured. And so that means every employer who has a big medical bill like this one, $1 million, it's literally the employer who's paying it. It's not the insurance company who's getting stuck with the risk. So employers like this who are self-insured, and every time they have an expensive employee with an expensive medical issue or expensive birth, like in this case, they're paying it directly out of their own pocket. And we see cases sometimes where small-ish employers, like cities and towns with maybe 15 employees who are self-insured, just one really expensive medical condition of one of their employees can almost financially ruin them. So they do all sorts of shady shit to avoid covering them or to try and get them to leave the employment. So this was just the last straw for me, was like, not only can you get screwed by the hospital charging you and your baby for the same room, double billing, so to speak. Not only can you get screwed by insurance plans, which has all these gaps in coverage that you probably didn't even know about, but also you have these hoops to jump through with your employer, where almost no one knows what you have to do. They're like, oh yeah, this was clearly written out in a footnote in your employment document when we hired you. It's like no one reads those little, small print shit.
I
So there's
remember
just
being learning about that when I worked for the state in California, and my daughter was going to go on my insurance. There was a very nice woman in HR who walked through all the policies and here's what you need to do. And I remember being terrified that I was going to forget to submit the insurance form.
It's like an expensive slip of the mind.
$1 million
with you to the hospital. There's something I had to take to the hospital to get them to sign it. It's not just you go online later and you enter some stuff. It's a little bit more complicated than that.
And just so you know, with a $1 million hospital bill, if you get on a payment plan and pay $100 a month, you can pay it off in just a little over 700 years. So it's
great.
Not all that bad, right?
That's great.
Just put your baby on layaway,
Will they come and repossess your baby if you don't pay? That's the real question.
That's going to be a lot more expensive for them.
Yeah.
So some real costs. They should probably just let that go.
Jillian, should we close out and talk a little bit about kind of the policy solutions, or at least what we can do about this kind of right now?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
All right, let's start on something upbeat.
Tell us what we can do to solve this morass of a problem.
All right. Well, there's a couple pieces, I guess. I mean, obviously, this is a really important part of what Medicare for All would do. You would at least have universal care for all birthing expenses, prenatal care, postnatal care. So we've got to keep up the fight for Medicare for All. And I think we should talk more about this particular aspect of the system, just because it's so fundamental to a healthy society. I did want to flag something that we learned about, and I actually hadn't been aware of this, which is that the COVID relief bill that did pass, I'm not talking about Build Back Better, which has just been, falling apart in pieces. This was supposed to be the, let's recover from the COVID economic disaster. This is the bill that actually did pass early on in 2021. And a lot of folks got the relief checks, the one-time, deposits. It also included a provision that allows states, because almost half of all births in the United States are covered by Medicaid, which is interesting. And but Medicaid only covers postpartum care for mothers for 60 days after birth, which is wildly inadequate, especially depending on your circumstances of your birth. One provision of the American Rescue Plan of 2021 is that states have the ability, if they choose to extend that postpartum care under Medicaid to a full year, from 60 days to a full year, which is 10 additional months, which seems like a no-brainer and really, really important. But surprisingly, not many states have followed through on this so far, including there's a bunch of states that have kind of started the process but haven't really made it through yet. I'll pull up there's like a map on the Kaiser Family Foundation. There's a lot of states that haven't even started the process. Only 4 have actually approved waivers that do this expansion. A couple more have kind of pending proposals. There's, I don't know, like it looks like 10 or 11 more that have enacted legislation but are not yet in the waiver system. And then there's a shit ton of states that haven't even started. And interestingly to me, this map doesn't look like it maps perfectly onto the Medicaid expansion, non-Medicaid expansion states. Under the Affordable Care Act. You would expect that it would have mapped perfectly onto it, but it looks like Florida is like pending, is about to implement this. Texas is seeking federal approval. Your great state of Texas, Jillian. So I think this is an area where advocacy could be really important, especially since it doesn't seem to be falling as a pure red state, blue state thing. So this might be something to educate yourself a little bit more about and organize in your state legislature, because I think this mostly has to be moved by the state legislatures. So
it's really, I mean, one of the things that Rebecca was saying when we were talking to her about her story is just like how infuriating it is when people say that they're pro-life and they don't fight for Medicare for all.
Right.
So infuriating. Oh my God. Among all parental leave and subsidized childcare and public education. You're pro-life.
Well, once the child is born, we don't care about it anymore.
Correct.
And then you're on your own.
The message that we're all getting.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that Texas and Florida are demonstrating at least one very small area in which they recognize that if you're going to force women to give birth, then you should maybe
help them recover
right.
from that.
Brilliant idea. And the other thing I'd highlight, and again, this is going to be a tougher one, but there is a Black Maternal Health Caucus in Congress, and they've developed a bill focused on addressing those racial inequities in maternal health that we talked about at the beginning.
What's the bill called, Ben?
This is my absolute favorite part of this entire podcast. So they drafted a bill called the Momnibus Bill. And it was actually, it includes a bunch of provisions trying to address racial inequities. And again, I think Medicare for All would go even further probably than most of the provisions in this bill, but it would be a good start. It was included in the Build Back Better bill that passed the House. Excuse me. I'm not sure if it made it into the Senate bill. And of course, all of Build Back Better is a flaming train wreckage right now. So it's not clear if that's going to make it through, but it does have bipartisan support, this bill. So again, it might be one of those things that could be passed even if Build Back Better falls apart. So.
Yeah. And we want to keep an eye on the Black Maternal Caucus, which is a really cool group of legislators who are really, devoted to, trying to fix some of this racial disparity stuff. So we want to, kind of keep an eye on them and make sure we're looking at the next things they come up with too. Yeah, that's great. I do want to say I also found another solution to this. So one of our lovely listeners wrote in. This woman's name is Sharon, and she basically created a hack, right? And because we're live on YouTube and everything, so I mean there has to be a hack, right? That's internet content. Mm-hmm. So here's Sharon's hack. I'm going to read from her letter. I'm sharing my story about how I used the money from a class action suit against A.H. Robbins Company because of their IUD product, the Dalcon Shield, led so many women like myself having tubal infections and sterility. So basically the company knew when they were manufacturing and selling these IUDs that there was a really high rate of pelvic inflammatory disease, which leads to tubal scarring and all sorts of other complications, but they hid the data, right? So you got this fucked up insurance, sorry, I'm so used to talking about fucked up insurance companies. This is a fucked up big pharma big pharma company. And so you got this fucked up big pharma company, which is deliberately selling IUDs that are making women sick, right? And so this is what she decided to do was to sign on to this class action suit. And she says, the money I got almost paid for my attempts at in vitro fertilization, which were finally successful. 4 tries, and in the end with donated eggs. My son is now 26. The cost, just throw out what you guys think the cost was.
For a round of IVF or for the whole, however many rounds?
Yeah.
Donated eggs. I'm going to go with like $40,000.
Close, $90,000.
Just
move the decimal point.
Wild.
Not that close. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So basically the only real like kind of immediate solution that we have to this problem is sue Big Pharma in order to pay Big Pharma. That's the hack.
Right.
Unfortunately, you have to get pelvic inflammatory disease first, and no one wants that.
No, I don't think that's worth it.
That's almost like GoFundMe hack. It's like, it works sometimes for some people, but yeah. But it does raise the, we're kind of just focused on the costs of childbirth here, but there is this bigger, broader question just around, the ability to afford to have a child when you want to, and to not have a child when you don't want to, healthcare it's just, there's so little support in the United States for having families, essentially. But
yeah, it's almost like this country doesn't give a shit about us.
Pretty much.
And on that note, thank you so much to our
way to wrap on a positive vibe, Jillian.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that like really, what's the positive angle on this? But Claire, but throughout these shows, basically what happens is that by the end of the episode, I'm furious and hopeless, and Ben tells me what we should do about it. It's always fight for single-payer health.
Right. That is kind of the podcast theme, I guess.
It's a good pattern. People know what to expect.
Yeah. All right. I hope you're all enjoying your Valentine's Day. Nobody go home and screw tonight. Just be very, very careful. We've done a public service here, I think. But I actually learned a real lot through this episode. I wasn't aware of a lot of this stuff, the employer-based stuff. So Claire, I'm sorry you had to I'm sorry you and so many moms had to crash into the healthcare system for us to learn about how broken it is. But thanks for joining us and telling your story. I think these are also really powerful stories, especially when speaking to conservative legislators who are professing a certain range of values publicly, that obviously not living up to it in their policy. But I think telling these stories has the potential to move, especially forget about Republicans, but just centrist Democrats who are going to need their vote to sort of win this eventually. And I also really want to thank the podcast team. Our podcast manager is Angelique Davis. Thank you so much, Angelique. Our researcher for this episode was Sophia Simeon. Our audio editor was Christian Brandt, and our show notes writer was Jerry Katz. Thanks so much, everyone, and we will talk to you in a couple weeks.
Stay safe, stay dangerous. Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks